Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey David, how you doing today?
Good day so far. Lots going on. Lots going
Mm,
on, including Oilers news, Bruce.
yeah.
Something about him being a distinct possibility to sign with the Edmonton Oilers. So we will, from team insider Bob Stauffer, we will talk about that, Bruce. We will also
I,
talk about our keep, hold, and fold or fold series in regards to the future of Edmonton Oilers players, and we were looking at a number of forwards most recently: Chiasson, Khaira, Ennis, and Sheahan. You're going to be writing about. We're both going to be writing about goalie Mike Smith. And there's also some trade rumors buzzing around, such as Chiasson for Bjork. So we'll probably cover that when we talk about Chiasson for Anders Bjork. Buffalo, another rumor kind of buzzing around, and I'm not sure where this comes from, although I saw it being discussed, and I was discussing it. Brett Connolly of the Florida Panthers for Zach Kassian of the Edmonton Oilers, which was an interesting idea.
mm.
I'm just going to turn on my light here, Bruce. But so why don't we start with? Do you want to just say what Stauffer's saying in his tweet? Are you prepared to? Do you have that up? I'll
I
say
did.
that, and then we'll get your reaction. Here's what
Okay.
Stauffer tweeted. He said, "Quote: Distinct possibility that we see Jesse Puljujarvi return to Edmonton Oilers on a short-term deal. New GM head coach since Puljujarvi was last in Edmonton. Puljujarvi's agency has merged with Connor McDavid's agency. Oilers would have 6 right wings, could result in a right wing being moved for a left wing."
Mm,
All right, so just go ahead, Bruce. I'm just going to turn that light on. What's
right
your
on.
take?
Yeah. Well, certainly it's good news if they finally built that bridge from Finland to Edmonton again, and uh, as Bob Stauffer says, I mean, there's a new GM, there's a new coach that was in place last year and still in place now that don't connect to Puljujärvi's prior time. There's also been a change of agents. Apparently, Puljujärvi is now represented by the same firm as Connor McDavid. And that may
Same agent,
possibly that same agent, yeah. So that may
but different firm.
that same agent, different firm.
Well, Marcus Lato joined, same agent, Marcus Lato, but he joined a new, they
Oh, I
merged with a
oh
new firm.
okay, I
Does
got
that
it.
make
So
sense?
so they're represented by the same firm, even as late. Yeah,
Oh,
okay. Anyway,
different,
that
yeah, yeah.
that
Oh, yeah,
might
same
help.
firm as McDavid, yeah.
That might help build a little bit of a bridge because some of the stories, of course, were that Puljujärvi's issues were not just necessarily with management and coaching, but it might have been within the team. So hopefully there's a little better basis for understanding there. Short-term contract, entirely expected that he would sign a one-year deal, frankly, uh, and the price should be pretty reasonable because he doesn't have a lot of options. He doesn't have. He can't go to arbitration. He's at the end of his entry level contract, so he'll be due a 5% raise on 925,000. Call it $1 million, and the Oilers might sweeten that a little bit, but I don't see them going even as high as 1.5 that reportedly they were asking for. He's still in the prove it stage, and this will be a huge year for him if he comes back to prove it that he's an NHLer and maybe that he's a long term solution for the Edmonton Oilers, or maybe that he's got the skill and talent to play in this league, but they'll agree at the end of the year or during the year to move on from him. But far better position to do that, seeing him in the NHL playing against other NHLers as opposed to highlight reels from Finnish leagues, uh,
This
especially
is,
Finnish exhibition games against
yeah,
questionable opponents.
let's not get into the quality of the opponents.
Yeah.
Kurt got in a little hot water, I think, for suggesting that. Here I'm getting into it a little bit, but Kurt got into a little bit of hot water for suggesting that the Finnish. I think Kurt meant that this tournament that Puljujarvi was in and the highlight reels were coming from was kind of like a high senior league in Canada or something like that. because they were playing against like a Div 2 or 3 team in a 3-on-3 game. So some of the highlight reel stuff was kind of from really low competition. It saw, Puljujarvi shred the other team, go up the middle of the ice and score a goal. But the Finnish league itself is it's equivalent. It's a close equivalent to the AHL in terms of level of competition.
It's AHL caliber. I can tell you that the NHL equivalencies, which translate points in other leagues to NHL, and that's a way of comparing the leagues, because the equivalency for the AHL, I believe, is 0.40, and for SM Liga is 0.37. So clearly they're pretty close to one another when it comes to that kind of thing. So that at least allows you to take the temperature and say it's fairly equivalent to the AHL.
Another temperature reading came from the World Championships recently, where a group of players from that league won the World Championship against a group of elite Canadian players who were probably good enough, if you put them on a team, would have won the Stanley Cup. So I think that's how good that Canadian team was. They usually are. They have that level of talent. The thing is, I think there's maybe a lot of variation. Maybe there's more variation in the Finnish league, where there's some really, really good players, but there's also weaker players. Anyway, Bruce, there's a couple points.
Khaira was on that team, eh?
Oh, is
just
that right?
Another no name. Khaira. Everybody knows his name now.
I just want to stress a few things here. Holland has played this really well. If he's getting Puljujarvi back, I was hopeful at one point that, if the draft had been earlier before the playoffs and there hadn't been a lot of other free agents involved, a lot of trade material involved because the playoffs were coming, Puljujarvi's value might have been at an all-time high then. But heading into this draft, it looked like the Oilers would not be able to, I'm guessing, just like at most a second and maybe a third-round pick for Puljujarvi. They weren't going to get anything more than that, which is really low value for a player that still, we don't know if he might still be a top 6 winger in the NHL. Again, he's had good results with McDavid in a really small sample size, or a relatively small sample size, but very good results. We've all seen his talent, his size, his puck handling ability. I think he's got good vision on the ice for making a pass. And I also think he's a responsible defensive player. I think the questions about his, maybe they want him to be a different player, but I think he, in terms of his on-ice vision and his reading, offensive reads of the game, I think they're actually strong. I like this player a lot. And so good value and good move by Puljujarvi in the end too, to get his, the Oilers were going to lose him. Everyone seems to forget this. If Puljujarvi had come back, like everyone was so offended that didn't happen, the Oilers would have lost him because they had run out of options with him. Either he was going to make the team last fall, Bruce, and that, I don't think that was going to happen. Tippett had to win, and I don't see Puljujarvi coming back from injury, having bad confidence with the Oilers. That wasn't going to happen. They would have had to send him to the minors, and they couldn't do that without exposing him to waivers. So there was no good options last fall with this player. So Puljujarvi created that in a way by forcing it, going back, getting healthy again after hip surgery, double hip surgery, having a good year. And Holland then didn't budge. He didn't waver. He held on to the player, hoping he coax him back. It looks like that's happening. Huge win, I think, if that happens for Ken Holland. And I hope a win for Jesse Puljujarvi, because I think he's in a much better position. And to get to your point, that he didnn't fit on the Oilers, in what I would say the sentence that describes that is, Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl wanted to play with each other. They didn't want to play with Jesse Puljujarvi or other wingers necessarily, so that didn't work out. Now McDavid's in a different position looking for wingers, and Puljujarvi might be a decent fit. And I'm not saying he should be gifted the job. I'm saying he might be a decent fit and a good idea to try him there.
Yeah, well, I think he slots somewhere into the top 9, and whether that's third line, second line, first line, I mean, what we've seen in the recent years is, what Chiarelli calls churn, guys moving up and down the lineup, and they get their chances, right? I mean, last year, one of Tippett's default positions was to move Josh Archibald up with McDavid. Well, if he's got Puljujarvi option, he's going to try it.
Yeah, and I didn't like that one.
Yeah, well, Arch
he's okay.
Did some good stuff, and some I mean, he was in some extent a fish out of water on the first line. Um, so anyway, it would just open up another option for see what fits, right? And I mean, you never know. I mean, last year they tried Yamamoto with Draisaitl, and it fit so well they never changed it, right? So, and you know that if Yamamoto had struggled for any length of time there, he would have got shuffled around as well, but didn't need to because he was ready. So I think now Puljujarvi's, by the time they start playing again, he's going to be almost 2 years older than when he played his last game for the Oilers back in February of 2019. And I think uh, as important in some ways is that any teammates that he had in the past, they're also going to be 2 years older, and there's going to be,
Yeah.
a gap, and that gap in time where maybe they weren't getting on each other's nerves or whatever the heck it was. And I just expect more maturity on all sides of the equation. And that was, one thing. I think it's fair to say that Puljujarvi being brought over as a 18-year-old from northern Finland, I mean, it wasn't reasonable to expect a fully mature player, and he got rushed over, and that was, the mistake of Oilers management primarily.
I liked him when he first came on that line with Draisaitl and Maroon.
Hmm.
And anyway, not to be. Uh, I wonder, like, he's an interesting player to play with McDavid, and I'm getting back to this, and I know a lot of people hate this very thought, but the results were real over 400 even strength minutes, a 61% goals for percentage, lots of shots on net,
Hmm.
and when you think about it, why did that work a little bit? I think if you're going to have those two together, what you need to do is to have a third player. It's not going to be like the Yamamoto Draisaitl Nugent Hopkins line where it's give and go. They're all reading off each other constantly, covering for each other, uh, moving the puck constantly. That's not how this line would work, I don't think. But it would be more like two guys, Puljujarvi and especially McDavid, dominating the puck, going after the puck, and one guy kind of in the high slot, crashing the net now and then as made sense, but covering for them defensively as
Right.
those two guys kind of combined to make plays. And is Puljujarvi at that level where he could be that player? Get in there hard, get the puck, work with McDavid to make plays. I think there's a chance, and I think we saw that to some extent already when they were together, which is why they had success. Puljujarvi may be more ready to be that player. So, and again, I'm not saying you hand that to him or anything like that. I'm just saying it makes sense to give that in terms of the things you're going to try and the churn you talked about. This is the
Hmm.
one of the things that you move to
Right.
during due diligence with your team. You just like you had to move Nugent Hopkins away from center, due diligence, put him on the wing, and that seems to have worked out. No one's talking about trading Nugent Hopkins anymore. So you try things out, you see if they work.
Hmm. Well, you put Nuge on the left wing, and then you potentially have a killer line, or I'm
Yeah.
thinking what you don't do is maybe put James Neal on that line. You want a guy that can skate and look after the defensive side of things. And I'm still kind of liking Joachim Nygaard
Yeah,
as a
Bruce, me
dark
too.
horse of a guy who might be able to fill an important role as a third wheel with wheels on the line. Although bad news today, I read a report that Nygaard broke the same finger
Oh,
that
did he?
ruined his season last year,
Oh,
and he's out 4 to 6 weeks with this broken finger now in the Swedish league, which is
I didn't know
just
he was playing.
a bummer all the way around. Yeah,
Oh,
he got loaned over there just after. Well, he got loaned over there first actually
oh,
because
that's
he had
right.
missed
Yeah,
all that time, and then Haas got loaned over there. Now Patrick Russell's over there. They found homes for Lavoie, Benson. They were just moving guys willy nilly over
it's
to
great.
Europe.
It's
It
great.
is. I don't mind it at all, but the risk you take, of course, that they might get hurt. And this same finger. I mean, how bad a break
Crappy.
is that? Yeah. Yeah,
Really
I'll
crappy.
save that word for when it's really important. But
Yeah.
how bad a break is that? I mean, come on, hockey gourds.
Well, it could be worse. Could be his leg or something like that.
Well, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Bruce, let's talk about the other aspect of Stoffer's tweet.
Hmm.
That this notion of trading a right wing for a left wing, And let me just go here, Bruce. Let's go down the roster because it's kind of hard to figure out who the right wings and left wings are on the Oilers because they move around a bit. Because I think Russell, definitely Neil, definitely Archibald, all played. Did Chiasson sometimes? No, he's usually the right winger. But Draisaitl, when he's on the wing, can play either wing. So there's a number of guys who kind of shift around in their positions. Right. But right now at right wing, I have Yamamoto, Chiasson, Chiasson, Russell, plus Archibald and Neil, who sometimes play right wing. Or Archibald, most often plays right wing.
Yep.
And then you have finally Puljujarvi.
6 guys, yeah.
That's actually, if you include, that's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 7 if you include Puljujarvi.
Well, if you include Neil, yeah, 6 right shot. There's 6 right shot wingers.
Yeah,
I mean, that's how Neil. I just base them as righty or lefty. And
so
Neil likes to play right wing, but there's obviously no room at the end there for him, and lots of room on the left wing, so he'll stay over there. But this thought that they might trade out a right winger for a left wing, it may gather. There's been stuff in the rumor mill, but if Puljujarvi is coming over, that may trigger some kind of action.
So some of the rumors we've heard, and I can't remember. Is the right word what's the provenance of the rumor? I guess, like where it comes from.
Provenance.
Provenance. I was going to say etymology of the rumor.
That's what they say on Antiques Roadshow. Provenance. Yes.
The provenance of the rumor is not these rumors. I think they have been discussed on Oilers Now, which is kind of like my litmus test for. Well, Bob sometimes likes to stir the pot as well. But it's kind of a litmus test. He's obviously the most well-connected Oilers insider who works for the team. Right. So I think it's been discussed there. But anyway, Alex Chiasson for Anders Bjork. And another one I heard it talked about was Brett Connolly, a right winger for the Florida Panthers for Zach Kassian. What do you think of those two rumors, Bruce?
Well, I think the Chiasson for Bjork idea, if you're really talking righty for lefty, that's the one that actually fills both ends of that bill.
Yeah.
And I'm a booster of Alex Chiasson. I like him, and I am in the. It seems like the minority. Everybody so hates the contracts of some of these guys that they almost just sort of write them off, and it drives me nuts sometimes. I mean,
yeah, me too.
Alex Chiasson, he was great in the net front role last year. Absolutely tremendous. And I've got the numbers to back it up. The Oilers power play had a 40-year high in the NHL for conversion rate. And they basically ran 2 units, one with Chiasson, one with Neil, all the other guys the same. And the Chiasson unit significantly outscored the Neil unit, even though Neil himself popped a bunch of power play goals. When Chiasson was out there, what tended to happen was he crowded the net front. He paid attention to business, very disciplined, screened the goalie, occupy defenseman, create lanes behind. And when you have guys like McDavid, Draisaitl, and Nugent Hopkins making cross-ice passes to one another through those lanes, good things happen. And Draisaitl himself, of course, popped a ton of power play goals on that unit, which on the other unit, Neil was the one that was getting more of the goals. But I think the Chiasson, it's like having a great offensive lineman, and everybody sees the quarterback make the pass and the receiver make the catch, and they don't ever think about the lineman. But if you don't have a good offensive line, you're toast.
Are you calling him the Anthony Munoz of the Edmonton Oilers?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
That's my vintage with the NFL. I haven't watched it in a long time, but I did.
Yeah, he was a terrific lineman. Yeah. I call him the Charlie Turner of the Edmonton Oilers. Let's keep it local here. Yeah, I found out Charlie's still alive, and he still lives in Edmonton. 85 years old now.
That is going way. I go back. Like I could tell you probably the starting lineup of the 1980s Eskimos, but Charlie Turner. Right. Wow, that's 70s. That's some 70s stuff. Soon you're going to be regaling us of the stories of Bruce.
Almost mandatory 70s.
Bruce Letterman, was that his name?
Bruce Lemmerman, yeah.
Lemmerman. Anyway, so what do you think of Chiasson? You're not Chiasson for
Well, I
Bjork?
like Chase. I like Chiasson. I'm not a huge fan of his contract, but I don't hate it with the heat of 1,000 suns like some people seem to. I mean, sometimes, I mean, the Lucic contract, that's one to hate. You know, the Russell contract, that's one not to like because of the long-term nature of it. There's a big difference between 7 years at 6 million or 4 times 4 versus 2 times 2. I mean, you're getting down into in a league where the average salary is like 3 million. Paying a veteran depth guy who has significant function on one of the special teams and performed well in a depth role at even strength, like that's not a problem to me. I didn't mind it. And I mean, his numbers went down in terms of, goals and assists. He had that career year, which is, of course, what triggered that contract, the 22 goal year. But I thought he basically covered the bet, frankly. Anders Bjork, on the other hand, he's younger. He just turned 24. He's smaller, 6 feet 190. Uh, he was only a fifth round draft choice back in 2014. But after 3 years playing for Notre Dame, where he became a very good scorer, 52 points in his last year at Notre Dame, very good college hockey, he came up with the Bruins, and in each of his first 3 years, he played time in both the NHL and the AHL. The problem being that he suffered season-ending injuries early in the new year of both his first two seasons, which kind of set the guy back a little bit. But this year, he played 58 games in the NHL, just 7 in the AHL. 19 points, 9 goals, 10 assists, so really not that different from Chiasson's scoring rate. And he played 10 playoff games, 1 point. And he was a healthy scratch some of the time. So, he's on the border of the roster. But in July, Boston signed him to a 3-year extension at $1.6 million. So that's what you're taking on. Chiasson's got 1 year to go at 2.15 million. Bjork's got 3 years to go. I mean, the good news, I guess, is that Boston liked the guy enough to sign him for that. And I mean, it's the last thing they did with him. It's not like it's a contract that they now regret and they want to move away from as if he was, let's say, Brandon Manning or Ryan Spooner. He's a guy they just signed. That's the last thing they did. So clearly they have hopes for him that they gave him a nice raise like that, a 3-year deal. But that's the commitment you'd be signing on to for a guy that really is still just proving himself as an NHL player. But he is a lefty. He plays left wing.
Hadn't they just kind of signed Spooner like a year earlier too to a big deal? And
like 2 months earlier.
Yeah, so they were pretty high on Spooner as well. He had the Boston stamp of approval. Bruce, I would say this: Bjork's and Chiasson's even strength scoring wasn't that different. Chiasson's even strength scoring is abysmal. It's right, the lowest level. He's a fourth line forward, definitely, when you go by even strength scoring. If all he was a fourth line winger and didn't have that power play cachet, I would, you'd definitely be moving him out because he's not a great even strength player. He's like, I thought he's the kind of player though that Eastern Conference teams, you hear about all these Eastern Conference teams now wanting physicality, bigger players who can crash and bash. And this is, you're hearing Kassian wanted in the East, possibly. We're hearing Chiasson. That's really interesting. And when we think about the playoffs this year, Kassian didn't do well, but Chiasson, Neal, and Khaira was a very effective line, or an effective line, at least for the Edmonton Oilers in the playoffs this year. And Chiasson, Bruce, I just love his hockey IQ on the power play. He has figured out exactly what that power play unit needed, which was to get as close as humanly possible to that goalie, and when the puck's above the goal line, to stay there in that spot,
right.
Not to try to become the shooting option, not to get fancy and look for the one-timer pass, but just to crowd that goalie and be enough of a threat with his stick welded to the ice that a pass can come in and he can put it in the net, so they can't ignore him. He pulls defensemen to him, and that opened up those seams like nothing else this year. That is brilliant and gutsy. That's really hard to do in the NHL. You got to have you take a lot of hits, you take a lot of abuse doing that, and he did it. So for that reason, he was integral to the Oilers' power play success this year. And to think about moving out a guy like that, who also in the playoffs can be this rugged guy on your fourth line, I'm I'm not so sure I want to move him, especially for a player in Anders Bjork who's a lot smaller and whose points per game, at least initially in the NHL, isn't that much better than Chiasson's at even
Right.
strength. So it's marginally better, but it's not much better over the last 2 years. Now, probably last year Bjork's is because Chiasson's really crashed last year, and so Bjork probably did quite a bit better than them this year. But I don't know. Like, do I see Bjork as an answer? Like, I haven't seen the player play, so I can only say so much. But I have seen Chiasson play, so I'm hesitant to see him moved. As for Chiasson versus Connolly, Brett Connolly is an, a very strong even strength point scorer in the NHL the last 2 years. I think he ranks in the top 90, which would place him as a top line forward in the NHL
Right.
during that time period. And he didn't always play with top line mates. He ranks 78th, 2.2 points per game, Bruce. That's really an attractive notion. Chiasson has the big contract. Um,
About
the
the
thing,
same though, really, as Connolly.
yeah, not that different. And the thing about it is, you lose Zach Chiasson and the physicality he has, the
Mhm.
menace that he has, the enforcer who can play. Um, I'm not so sure you would make that. God, I know that Cassian did nothing in the playoffs this year, and he did nothing after signing his contract essentially.
Pretty much.
And I know that that contract he's overpaid by $1 million a year,
Hmm.
but and Connolly really can score at even strength. So that's one that gives me like think you again. I need to know more about Connolly and have a more clear vision of his defensive play, which I know nothing
Right.
about.
Right.
But
That's,
Cassian is a very useful hockey player. And I disagree. And again, some people hate the contract so much that they can't see past that. But Zach Cassian offers a lot to the Edmonton Oilers, and I'd be hesitant to move him as well.
yeah, I'm not a fan of Cassian's defensive play, and I don't know much about Conley's defensive play. I mean, obviously the numbers that we see, at least the first glance ones, are on the offensive side of the puck. But the last 4 years, I don't think very much power play at all. 15, 15, 22, 19 goals. So
Yeah.
that's a pretty nice complimentary score, and that's a guy that could wind up in your top six. Now,
Yeah. So
but
you think about it.
he is a right winger. Uh, he's a he's a mature player now too. I mean, he's 28 years old. He was a first round number 6 overall draft pick in 2010. Well, it's 10 years later, and he's still, he's now established himself certainly as a full-time NHLer. Uh, I don't know how much higher his upside's going to be than what he's shown already.
Yeah.
Eh,
Let's just look at so around him. It's interesting the players around him when you look at even strength scoring the last 2 years. The players around him are Zach Hyman, who plays with really good line mates in Toronto, Anthony Mantha, who carries all the freight in Detroit, Jesper Bratt, Andrei Burakovsky, Brian Rust, Andrei Svechnikov, and Cam Atkinson. So a real variety of players scoring. This is kind of ranked in the 70th for forwards, even strength scoring the last 2 years. So that's an interesting group of players, and it's kind of the kind of guy that you'd be thinking would fit in with McDavid. Now, if Connolly is a really sharp defensive hockey player, and he may be, I can't, then that trade would be, I think you might check it off as a yes, because I agree with you that as much as Cassian can help you on the attack and his physical menace is, second to very few other players in the NHL, his defensive play, like if he had that defensive, strong, super strong defensive element to his game, if he had developed that over the years, he'd be
mm,
much more of a keep. Like it would be much easier to say, "Oh, definitely, we're going to keep him," because he could be that guy. With Puljujarvi. Well, Puljujarvi's on the wrong win, but you'd have two attackers, McDavid and another winger, and then Cassian would cover for him. But he's not that guy necessarily who's going to cover for you. So that's an interesting
yeah.
one. Bruce, do you have anything more, or do you want to move on to the next
Uh,
topic?
no, let's move forward.
Keep, hold, or fold
Hmm.
on Tyler Ennis and Riley Sheahan, who are both UFAs. Where do you come out? Let's start with Ennis. Where do you come out on him?
Well, on both of them, really, you have real solid NHL veteran guys with 500 plus games under their belt. who at least finished the season with Edmonton uh, at under $1 million. So from an economic standpoint, you're not really going to do much better than that. You go out and sign another veteran, well, you're not going to get him for cheaper. So what you need to do is go out and get a veteran who's a better player. That's not going to cost a lot more. And in the case of Ennis, in the time that we saw him, he was an opportunistic scorer. I think he had 3 goals, 3 assists in 12 games as an Oiler. Of course, the last we saw of him, he was getting helped off the ice after getting crunched into the boards and wrecking his
Yeah.
ankle, fractured ankle and ligament damage. And so the first question would be, which you and I don't know the answer to, but I bet the Oilers do, is what's the time frame of his return from that? I mean, this happened on August the 5th, I guess it was. So by the time they're playing games again, it'll probably be 5 months after that. So you would think that's probably enough time. But if there's any questions about his physical well-being, he's an unrestricted free agent. There's no big reason to roll the dice unless you have a real solid source that he's, you know, raring to go, or he might be ready to go early in the season, but you can stash him on IR until you're ready to put him in there. But you don't owe him any favors or anything like that. He's not under contract, and so if there are other options available, they may well wait and see what
Yeah.
comes on the market, because we're going to see a lot of action in a very short time. On Between October 6th to 9th, we're going to have the draft on the 6th and 7th, and then the really key deadline to me is the qualifying offer deadline on October 7th. And after that day, you're going to find guys that you didn't expect. You can look at the UFA list all you want. There's going to be new guys added to the UFA list who are unqualified RFAs who didn't get a qualifying offer. A la last year, Josh Archibald, right? I thought for sure thing is that Arizona would re-sign the guy, but I guess they were concerned not just about um, qualifying him, but that he might take him to arbitration and he might make more than they wanted to give him, so they just let him walk. And that's with a lot of these RFAs. That arbitration hammer is a big deal. That I would think every NHL team would want to avoid arbitration at all costs, because it's just an unknown. You make a qualifying offer to the guy. We talked about this with Athanasiou. You make a qualifying offer to the guy, and the guy says, "Well, I think, over the course of my last contract, I did better than that. I want to take it to arbitration." And the arbitrator, we don't know yet if he's going to rule based on past precedents, or if there's going to be some kind of a suppression of the raises just based on the fact that the overall salary cap is frozen, and there's not as much room to. But once it's in the arbitrator's hands, you don't know that until he dishes out his results, and then you have to live with it. So I think you're going to find it more than a few teams. I mean, this is why you're hearing it with the Oilers, with Athanasiou, Matt Benning, and you may find that on most NHL teams, there's one or two guys that are on that list where either the team locks them up early with a contract where they have the certainty of knowing what it's going to be, or at all costs they're just avoiding that arbitration thing and make the same decision that Arizona made with Josh Archibald last year. And that market could get flooded right at the last minute with quality players and guys that are going to be forced really to sign cheap contracts. But the guys without contracts
Yeah.
are in a tough spot.
I don't know how much the teams would even be worried about arbitration this year. They might be, but like if the
I
arbitrators are
would be.
if the arbitrators are sane,
Well,
they'll see the economics of the NHL, and they're going to have to reset. Because what this is really about, I would say, is not so much a fear of arbitration. That's a factor. That's one of the
mhm.
variables. But the real thing is they just want to sign these players for less. They're in this market. They're not. Fantasy is not worth $3 million. He's worth maybe two, 2.5 tops, I'm guessing. So that's what this is about: getting players at the right price for your team, because the market, as you say, is going to be quite a bit different. And so, yeah, with Ennis, who's going to be available? Can you get someone better than Tyler Ennis? He has a history of injury. He's not a young player. He's a little older, but I really loved how he played with the Oilers. I thought he was really good with in a top six role. He looked like he could fill in there at the least. And if he can, if you have him on the fourth line, then you got another guy who can skate on the bottom end of your roster. So I liked Ennis. If he's healthy, I hope he comes back. Sheahan and Khaira, who we're also going to get to here.
Right.
Listen, if it was the other way around and Sheahan had the contract for 1.2 million next year and Khaira didn't, I'd be thinking great, because Sheahan I think is a better player. He's the better defender by far at even strength. Khaira still struggles to cover the slot, and he struggles giving away the puck in his own zone. Khaira's more of a physical player, maybe has a bit more offense, maybe. But I think in terms of being the real deal on the penalty kill, and there's some question, like, was that Oilers penalty kill, is it sustainable? Can they keep doing that? And that's a very valid question. But I think Sheahan,
certainly not, in my opinion.
But I think Sheahan is like, he was one of the absolute keys on that penalty kill. He's a very smart penalty killer. He's an excellent penalty killer. And I'm not so sure Khaira. I think Khaira's pretty good. He had good results. But I think Sheahan, I'm much more convinced that next year, if you're counting on someone to carry your penalty kill, Sheahan's a much better bet than Jujhar Khaira. So where this is all heading is, if the Oilers can trade Khaira, there's apparently interest in physical players in the East. So let's say you have Chiasson, Chiasson, and Khaira. You move out one of them in a deal. Mm-hmm. We don't know who that might be, to change kind of this, get a little bit more speed or some offense in your attack, which the Oilers also need. Then maybe if it is Khaira, who would be my preference of those guys to get moved out, probably, then Sheahan might make sense. So it's kind of hold on all of them until you, on a certain level, because everything is so up in the air right now. You don't know what's going to happen. So Sheahan, could he come back at the right price and help out the team as a fourth line center? Yes, he certainly could do that. And Ennis, same deal. And Khaira, I haven't seen enough of Jujhar Khaira to say anything. But if you can move him at this point. I'm not. Although I liked his play in the playoffs, he's just been too inconsistent, Bruce, for too long, and I think the Oilers can do better.
Yeah, well, Sheahan, the other thing he brings is solid experience and decent results on the face-off dot, and that was something of value to the Oilers. Unfortunately, he's a lefty, but most of the options are lefties. I mean, but there will be other potential 3Cs on the market. The downside of Sheahan was that even strength, every teammate that he played with saw the results worsen when they were playing with Sheahan as opposed to playing away from Sheahan. And part of that was probably when they were with him, they got more of the grunt minutes that Sheahan tended to get, the more of the own zone starts and so on. But on the surface, he dragged down the goal scorer percentages of basically all of the guys that he played with any significant minutes with, all of them, every last one of them. Like, I had a long list of 14 guys, and they all were a couple of percent to, like, in a couple of cases, it was just ridiculous that there's so much different that were without him. That was a bit of an eye popper to look at that.
Yeah, fair enough. And Sheahan, wasn't he wasn't a brilliant even strength player, but there was a moment, Bruce, where I think so much of hockey is getting the right combinations of players together on the ice, and Sheahan spent a lot of time with Khaira, and I've said this before a million times, like, these two big slow players together on the ice at the same time, that did not work at all, did not come close to working, and we saw it in the fourth game of the playoffs. Was just eye-popping to me that they would go back to that. But when Sheahan was teamed up for a short time before Nygaard got hurt in January with Nygaard, Sheahan, and Archibald, that line, I haven't looked at the numbers for that particular line combination, but I thought they looked really good. I thought that was the right idea. Put Sheahan with two guys who are really strong defensive players as well and who can skate. And suddenly you have a third line that finally made sense. And it's such a shame that there was some injuries then to Nygaard and I think McDavid, or Cassian. Actually, it was Cassian
He got
first.
suspended.
Yeah, Cassian got suspended. Those two things broke up that line.
Twice.
Yeah, Cassian. And um, those two things broke up that great checking line. Now you could come back. You could. There's a chance you'll have that line together again this coming year and see if that works, because that really did work. And it gives me, again, it's another thing. The Khaira Chiasson Neal line also worked. So there's a couple things that make me think, in combination with the right players, both Khaira and Sheahan can contribute to the Oilers at even strength and in a winning way. But it's obviously not a huge, massive priority to keep either of them in the fold. And the same goes with Ennis.
I agree with your take that one of the two will be back, Khaira or Sheahan. And the overwhelming factor at this moment in time is that Khaira has a contract and Sheahan does not. So the default position seems to be that Khaira is the guy who'll be coming back to the Oilers. And of course, trades happen. I mean, it's very hard to predict the trade market. But that's the other way. I mean, the Oilers got 12 forwards under contract already. So these guys, Ennis, Sheahan, and Athanasiou, all three, are potentially in a spot of bother, just because there's so much competition and they're maybe looking to change things up.
I wonder, Philip Broberg got off to that great start, 3 points in his first game, and then the highlight reel plays in the preseason. But the most important thing was he played, I think, 22, 23 minutes, if I recall correctly, in the first game for Skellefteå. Right. And the fact that he's being used as the number one D-man on that team is just thrilling, Bruce. I was hoping he'd be in the top four. But the fact that he's in that top pairing and getting chances on the power play, taking advantage of them, it's interesting. I just wish that in some ways the trading deadline was a month later, because if they'll have, at least, it would be nice to have like 10, 20 games of Broberg in Sweden, because Bruce, if he, who knows what's going to happen. Obviously, he's not going to put up 3 points a game, but let's say he gets 0.7 points a game. Like he's one of the top scoring defensemen in the Swedish league this year. That speaks of a defenseman who's ready to play on the Oilers and could change the whole equation of how things go on the blue line and what the needs are, and whether they're interested in a player like Oliver Ekman-Larsson. And our colleague Kurt Levins raised the possibility that you're going to trade for Larsson and maybe have them eat some of his salary, Arizona eats some of his salary. I don't know how willing, honestly, Arizona would be to do that. The whole idea is moving him out on a salary dump. But if we saw more of Broberg, we might think, is that really what you want to do, is spend $8.25 million? I mean, honestly, Bruce, I don't like that.
Well,
I just
7 years. 7 years.
7 years.
When
you
you've
have Philip
already
Broberg coming up,
you've already got two top four left-handed defensemen. You got Caleb Jones, and then in the pipeline you got Philip Broberg. Like, is that your first priority? You got other problems to fix, and in my view, I mean, the good news about Broberg is, I mean, not only is the coach giving him that opportunity with that ice time, but it suggests to me that he's basically taken a big step forward and has seized the opportunity and is forcing them to use him because he's the best option they got. That's the optimistic view, but from this distance, it seems reasonable.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was either Jonathan Willis or Alan Mitchell did a big thing on Broberg. I think it might have been maybe both of them, where they looked at like similar age defensemen in the Swedish Hockey League and just how hard it is to tell based on their scoring as an 18-year-old where they're going to go offensively. So because sometimes they're used in a strictly defensive role and they're obedient, they might be an obedient player who just, if your role is defense, that's what you do in your 14 minutes of ice time, because you don't want to go out of the lineup because that's the next step, right? So we don't know where Broberg, he was playing against adults last year and he was getting regular playing time, which to me was the goal, and he succeeded in doing that. But anyway, it's kind of, it has me dreaming a little bit to see the highlight reel images and the scoring. It's like, Bruce, that one breakout play where he went back and retrieved the puck.
Man.
That was
He looked
and
like Miro
shredded the.
Heiskanen. He looked like Miro Heiskanen on that play. If you'd have
He
said
looked
this is Miro Heiskanen playing in the Swedish league, I would have said, "Yep."
he looked like Paul Coffey. I mean,
Oh,
he Bruce he that's what the level of skating that we saw in that play. It was
that was sweet.
and you know, again, it's not the NHL, and I don't know if that was an exhibition game or not. I think that was still an exhibition game, but nonetheless, that was that was kind of a that was absolutely eye popping. That kind of play um, from Broberg and cutting up the middle of the ice and hitting a guy for a breakaway pass. Wow,
Yeah, he beat
wow.
two guys in sort of half a second with you could call it one extended move or two quick moves, and was able to keep the puck under control, head up, bang on the tape of the guy at the far blue line for a breakaway. It was just sweet to watch, and he was flying. Like you look at that video, and it's, the forecheckers were doing what forecheckers to do, and he just it was a hockey situation, and he won the day with just a superior speed, skill, and execution.
A lot of now again, we're not. Who knows how he's going to turn out?
One play.
A lot comes down to. But his coach already said last year he loves this player. He thinks he's the most talented Swedish defenseman that he's seen that he's in decades.
It's the
And
great Frederick Olofsson, right?
yeah, which was kind of a sobering comparison on a certain level. Uh,
Oh, that's a good NHL player for a lot
he
of
was
years.
he was I just seem to remember the Oilers destroying Freddie Olofsson. That's
I
my.
remember him destroying the Oilers, frankly, but
Oh, there you go. I'm glad to see that. But yeah, pretty exciting stuff with with Broberg, and so we'll see if he can continue. And a few more games of that would be good heading into. I don't think the Oilers are actually that in on Ekman Larson. I can't see. Here's why. I just think Ekman Larson really, if he's going to be moved, it's going to be to a team that doesn't have Clefbaum and Nurse and Jones and Broberg and Sammer. It's going to be to a team with a crying need for a left shot D man who's willing to pay more than the Oilers, who's willing to take on all of that salary uh, rather than just part of it, and who doesn't have a $12 million player and already an $8.5 million player on their roster. There's going to be more demand from another team for Ekman Larson than there will be on the Oilers. So even if the Oilers were interested in, they probably are. I just don't see that happening. Let's just finish off quickly, Bruce, with Mike Smith. You're going to be, we'll be writing about that soon. Keep, hold, or fold. I'm going to go with definitely fold. His save percentage the last 2 years has been subpar. He's not getting any younger. There's going to be better options.
yep.
So yeah, keep your options open. Maybe you have to return to him, but come on, it's time to move. There's going to be better options than Smith, probably for less money.
Yeah, well, Ken Holland, I mean, he recently was quoted as saying that one of his options is Mike Smith because, he's the guy who was in the job last year. We can argue about how well he did the job. Some people think he's the worst goalie in the NHL. I think he was the worst goalie in the NHL for December.
Yeah.
The rest of the season, he wasn't that bad. I mean, his stats were substantially below Koskinen, except for in the all-important, and people hate this stat for goalies, wins and losses. But the team played pretty well in front of Smith, and he seemed to be an inspirational sort. And I mean, Holland's just given the guy due respect by saying he's in the mix, and he's just telling other teams, well, we have lots of options, so we don't have to pay your price to get your guy. In fact, he apparently already said that to Pittsburgh about Matt Murray, and that's good. I mean, why close the door? I just, I don't see them reopening the door for Mike Smith. I think unfortunately, his very difficult performance in Game 1 of the playoffs is the bad taste in the mouths of everybody, unfortunately. But he's clearly that's a position that they can upgrade, and they might have to pay more for it, or they may not. I mean, there's lots of different options out there. You can go out and get a goalie like Aaron Dell and not pay him in for that guy, and as a tandem with Koskinen, that's not too bad. And the key here is Koskinen. He's under contract, and he's a better goalie than some rate him for. Like statistically, he shows up really well. And I know Kevin Woodley, the regular guest on the Jason Greger show from In Goal magazine, and an expert on goals. I love his commentary, and he thinks quite highly of Koskinen, and he points out that, in some of these more advanced ways of measuring goalies, he's in the top half of, the top 15, top 10 in the league in a number of different metrics. So he's
Yeah.
not the problem.
With Koskinen, we have a little. Everyone, I think, in the oil country has a little bit of recency bias against him because
Same
he
thing,
he
yeah.
didn't come up with that big game in the
I would say.
playoffs. I would say that he came up about half the times he played in the NHL this season. He actually came up with that big game where he was better than the other team's goalie more often than not.
Mhm.
And some games he was just a wall. Like he had the other team so freaked out that they were missing the net consistently by the third period. He was just so big in the net and so well positioned and reading the game correctly. That didn't happen in the playoffs. He was out of kilter. The whole defense was out of kilter. They weren't, the Oilers' defense was abysmal. And man, did they ever have a lot of bad breaks, Bruce? Like I've been watching the playoffs, just the highlights, and what I notice is all of the goals that are scored on double screen the net and hope it goes in. And that's like a third. It seems like, or, it takes a bounce off someone's stick who's trying to block the shot. That's about at least a third of the goals, it strikes me. But in the Oilers series, the Oilers had lots of
Chicago was
goals.
getting those.
The Chicago got them again and again and again. Now, they didn't always score on that kind of goal, but they did repeatedly. They did get 4 or 5 of the
They,
six of
they
those
got nine
goals.
goals on point shots.
Yeah.
Chicago, and I mean, whether it was a rocket that went in, or whether it was deflected by a Chicago player in front that wasn't covered, or whether it was went off an Oiler, Chris Russell typically, and went in the net or whatever. There was different ways that that
Even better.
damn
Yeah.
puck kept going into the damn net, but it was uh, watching. At the time, we sort of going, why aren't they covering? Why aren't they? Why is all this happening? What's wrong with them? And the more playoff games I see, the more all the teams are doing this. Like you say, setting up the big double, triple screens in front, sifting the puck into traffic, and hoping for the bounce. I mean, I've seen a couple that literally went off the ass of a guy in front of the net and bounced into the top corner. You talk about those kind of goals, well, they've literally happened. And any number of sort of defenseman forward comes out to block the shot. It hits the shaft of his stick. It bounces down on the ice and rockets over the goalie's shoulder into the top corner. I mean, it's indefensible. You might think, well, that's a 50-foot shot. It shouldn't go in, but the goalie almost has no chance if the deflection goes a certain way, right? And we've just seen it over and over again. It's so random. It's frustrating as a hockey fan to see such randomness deciding so many games. And unfortunately, the Oilers series, I would say there was a lot of randomness in that decision.
Chicago did hit a lot of goalposts though too. Like it would be interesting to go back over the series and count, like actually count the goalposts and count the random shots that went in. Like try to figure out the luck factor in that series.
Yeah.
Actually have 5 games. That would be a lot of watching of hockey. But
I
we're gonna
have
have a bit of a break in November,
I
and
have
maybe I
all
will
of them
do
on
that.
my PVR, and I
Well, maybe
haven't.
we'll split it
I
up, and
can't bear to watch them yet. Maybe I'll
maybe
eventually
we
get to
could
the point
split it
where I
up.
can bear to watch them.
You watch two, I'll watch two, and we'll do a random. Like we'll
You
we'll
get
think
game one.
and we'll figure out. We'll see how desperate we get for content, Bruce,
Okay.
in November, early November, or late
Hmm.
October. But I'm kind of curious about doing that actually, and maybe there's other things that we could think about that we could look at in those
Right.
games that are appropriate to study. Yeah. So we're both saying fold on Mike
Yeah.
Smith. What about the last thing, just real quick? It was brought up. Craig Button said of TSN that the drafting of Askarov, and his first name escapes me right now, the Russian goalie
Carousel.
Yaroslav
Mhm.
Askarov would be a LeBron James slam dunk if Askarov was available to the Oilers at
Mhm.
that pick. May well be the case, Bruce. Like the Oilers have not done, like they've in the first round of the past, they've drafted Grant Fuhr and Devin Dubnyk.
Mhm.
It's against the wisdom of the analytics that drafting goalies is a good idea. Like if you have a high pick, what you want to do is first round pick, take a forward.
Mhm.
because NHL scouts are best at identifying forward talent. They're second best at identifying defensive talent, and
Mhm.
they're third best, considerably worse at identifying goalie talent.
Mhm.
So for that reason, I'm hoping with their 14th overall pick and with the high number of highly skilled forwards that the Oilers take a forward in this draft. And Askarov would run completely against that analytical thrust. But again, I
But
haven't watched these players, so it's hard for
overall,
me.
I've seen a bit of Askarov and at the U18s and so on, and
Yeah,
very very good netminder. Uh, the thing about goalies, I mean, people say don't waste a first round pick on the goalie, but if you look at the history of first round picks and goalies, there's some mighty fine goalies. You know, the truly exceptional ones that got picked in the first round. I mean, you talk about Grant Fuhrer, Tom Barrasso, Roberto Luongo,
Carey
Marty
Price.
Brodeur, Carey Price, uh, Andrei Vasilevsky, that's in the Stanley Cup Finals. Tampa decided to invest their first round pick in a goalie in 2012, and they got it right. And now they've never had to worry about that position again, other than finding a backup, that can go in and, play a handful of games and spend the rest of the time being a supportive teammate, right? They got Curtis McElhinney, he's their backup now, and I mean that's an ideal situation. But it's a gutsy move. Tampa made the move; it paid off for them. You could find other examples where teams thought they were doing that and it didn't pay off. But the truly exceptional goalies that have been drafted in the first round, a lot of them proved to be pretty exceptional and to be fine goalies. And there's more buzz about Askarov than there's been about any goalie in a while. So
Yeah,
I actually don't think he'll be there at 14. I think
no, that's
Carolina, who've had goaltending headaches of their own, I think they might invest in that position because they're pretty well stocked elsewhere in their
yeah.
organization, and they have a specific need there that they may just do what Tampa did all those years ago and say, we want this guy to solve this problem. Done.
And the analytic trends are only worth so much. I mean, you say don't draft a defenseman necessarily with a higher pick, but I mean, how else do you get these really great defensemen? So many of them are taken at the top end of the draft as well. And let's say Broberg does turn out. I mean, everyone was, not everyone, but many, many people were so sour
Mm-hmm.
with the Broberg pick last year, right? Because there was
Yep.
all these American forwards, and then the sourness reached a new peak at the World Junior Tournament when Broberg played in a defensive role, didn't particularly stand out, and the guy that was taken just behind him in the draft, Trevor Zegras, was the star attacker for the United States. Not that
Mm-hmm.
the Oilers would have taken Zegras. We have like if they had taken a forward, one of the rumors is they would have if Dylan Cousins had been there. Is that the same
Right.
draft? They would have taken him, and not Broberg. So you know, whoever the Oilers take, Bruce. I'm not going to sit there on draft day because I don't watch these players. I'm not going to complain about it. I'm not going to complain about it. I'm going to say, I hope they got it right. Fingers crossed they got it right. Um,
Yeah.
that's about as good as I can do for the commentary. But because even though I know a little bit about the draft analytics, I don't watch these players in 30, 40 times, so I can't really say.
Yeah, well, casting judgment on 18-year-old kids because you wanted someone else is a little premature. Like you got to give these guys room to grow. I'm in Low Tide's camp. 5 years, 2 years back in junior, 3 years of their entry level contract, and then you got a pretty good idea of what you got. And an exceptional player you'll know earlier. And I'm hoping that's going to be the case with Philip Broberg. But they've got
Where are
you
we
know
with
this
Puljujarvi? Is this his fifth year?
This he was drafted in 2016, so
Yeah,
this will
so
be his draft plus 5 year coming up.
this is it. This is it.
It's a bit it's a uh, kind of a
Well,
crystallization point for many players.
and everyone remembers in these draft conversations, they all remember the time they wanted the Oilers to take a player. The Oilers didn't take that player, and they rub it in the Oilers' face
Alex
forever. Like,
DeBrincat, man, they
yeah,
should have took
Matthew
Alex
Bars.
DeBrincat.
But this the same guy might have been the same guy pushing. Oh, they should have taken Sam Bennett instead of Leon Draisaitl,
Right.
right? There was a
Yeah.
huge faction of Oiler fans, very very vocal about taking Sam Bennett
Mhm.
over Leon Draisaitl. So people, you know, I always take it with a grain of salt when someone
Mhm.
holds themselves out as like they should have listened to me and taken taken, so and so in the draft.
And that's part of just the
Part of the
pleasure
fun.
of being a hockey fan is you talk about you
Fair enough.
remember
Fair
the
enough.
ones that got away in your mind and so on.
Yeah.
And you just mentioned the magic name that we definitely need to talk about in this podcast briefly, which is Leon Draisaitl
Oh,
and his fantastic season, which saw him uh, win one trophy as the objective best scorer in the league with on the ice results, and then be recognized by both his peers with the Ted Lindsay Award and the experts, pundits, media folk that watch the game and vote that awarded him the Hart Trophy as the MVP. That's a nice hat trick and the first All Star team to boot. Nice
yeah.
season, Jan. That makes him the first star of the NHL season.
Congratulations to Leon Draisaitl. And you know what? If you are a Valerie Nikushkin fan, there's always next year. There is always next year. Bruce, let's leave it there.
Let's do that. Thanks
Thanks
for
for talking.
listening. Yeah, thanks
Oh,
for listening, everyone.
and in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.